Hi guys, this is Connie, back for some more Conniw Reads White Fragility. We are on chapter 4. I think this is our final section. Yes, final section. Obviously I can read, right? Welcome to Conniw Reads, where I stumble over everything but my name. We are at the end of chapter 4. I'll put whatever section it's supposed to be in the title. Chapter 4 is How Does Race Shape the Lives of White People? This is the final section called Segregated Lives. On a television talk show in 1965, James Baldwin responded passionately to a Yale professor's argument that Baldwin always concentrated on color. Here is his quote. "I don't know if white Christians hate Negroes or not, but I know that we have a Christian church that is white and a Christian church which is black. I know that the most segregated hour in American life is high noon on Sunday. I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me, but I know I am not in their unions. I don't know if the real estate lobby is against black people, but I know that the real estate lobbyists keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks they give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to. Now, this is the evidence. You want me to make an act of faith risking my life on some idealism which you assure me exists in America, which I have never seen." Ooh. Life in the United States is deeply shaped by racial segregation. Of all racial groups, whites are the most likely to choose segregation and are the group most likely to be in the social and economic position to do so. Ooh. Growing up in segregation, and then it says in parentheses, our schools, workplaces, neighborhoods, shopping districts, places of worship, entertainment, social gatherings, and elsewhere. Growing up in segregation reinforces the message that our experiences and perspectives are the only ones that matter. We don't see people of color around us, and few, if any, adults acknowledge a lack of racial diversity as a problem. In fact, the classification of which neighborhoods are good and which are bad is always based on race. These assessments may also be based on economic divisions among whites, but if Black and Latinx students attend a school in significant numbers, oh crap, I'm driving the struggle bus today. Let's get that sentence back together. These assessments may also be based on economic divisions among whites, but if Black and Latinx students attend a school in significant numbers, significant in the white mind, it says in parentheses, whites will perceive the school as bad. If there are people of color around us, we are seldom encouraged to build cross-racial friendships. Segregation is often lessened somewhat for poor urban whites who may live near and have friendships with people of color on the local level because white poverty brings white people into proximity with people of color in a way that suburban and middle class life does not. Parentheses says, except during gentrification when the mixing is temporary. Urban whites from the lower classes may have more integrated lives on the micro level, but we still receive the message that achievement means moving away from the neighborhood and schools that illuminate our poverty. Illuminate our poverty. Upward mobility is the great class goal in the United States, and the social environment gets tangibly wider the higher up you climb. Wider environments, in turn, are seen as the most desirable. For upwardly mobile whites from the lower class, reaching toward the most valuable places in society usually means leaving friends and neighbors of color behind. For example, I grew up urban and poor and lived in apartment buildings in crowded rental-based neighborhoods. In my childhood, there were many people of color around me. But I knew that if I was to improve my life, I would not stay in these neighborhoods. Upward mobility would take me to wider spaces, and it has. I did not maintain those early relationships with people of color, and no one who guided me encouraged me to do so. Segregation was still operating in my life at the wider societal level. It dictated what I learned in school, read in books, saw on TV, and learned to value if I wanted to improve my life. Mediocrity is a precious ideology in the United States, but neighborhoods and schools are demonstrably not equal. They are separate and unequal. Tax bases, school resources, curricula, textbooks, opportunities for extracurricular activities, and the quality of the teaching staff differ widely between school districts. Who is not aware that schools in the United States are vastly unequal? Or who is not aware that schools in the United States are vastly unequal? Without white people's interest or effort invested in changing a system that serves them at the expense of others, advantage is passed down from generation to generation. Rather than change these conditions so that public education is equal for all, we allow other people's children to endure conditions that would be unacceptable for our own. A 2009 study published in the American Journal of Education found that while suburban parents, who are mostly white, say they are selecting schools on the basis of test scores, the racial makeup of a school actually plays a larger role in their school decisions. Amy Stewart Wells, a professor of sociology and education at Columbia University's Teachers College, found the same coded language when she studied how white parents chose schools in New York City. She writes, quote, "In a post-racial era, we don't have to say it's about race or the color of the kids in the building. We can concentrate poverty and kids of color and then fail to provide the resources to support and sustain those schools. And then we can see a school full of black kids We can concentrate poverty and kids of color and then fail to provide the resources to support and sustain those schools. And then we can see a school full of black kids and say, oh, look at their test scores. It's all very tidy now, this whole system," unquote. Readers have no doubt heard schools and neighborhoods discussed in these terms and know that this talk is racially coded. Quote urban and quote low test scores are code for quote not white and therefore less desirable. While many whites see spaces inhabited by more than a few people of color as undesirable and even dangerous, consider another perspective. I've heard countless people of color describe how painful an experience it was to be one of only a few people of color in their schools and neighborhoods. Although many parents of color want advantages granted by attending predominantly white schools, they also worry about the stress and even the danger they are putting their children in. These parents understand that the predominantly white teaching force has little, if any, authentic knowledge about children of color and has been socialized, parentheses, often unconsciously, to see children of color as inferior and even to fear them. Imagine how unsafe white schools, which are so precious to white parents, might appear to parents of color. The most profound message of racial segregation may be that the absence of people of color from our lives is no real loss. Not one person who loved me, guided me, or taught me ever conveyed that segregation deprived me of anything of value. I could live my entire life without a friend or a loved one of color and not see that as a diminishment of my life. In fact, my life trajectory would almost certainly ensure that I had few, if any, people of color in my life. I might meet a few people of color if I played certain sports in school, or if there happened to be one or two persons of color in my class. But when I was outside of that context, I had no proximity to people of color, much less any authentic relationships. Most whites who recall having a friend of color in childhood rarely keep these friendships into adulthood. Yet if my parents had thought it was valuable to have cross-racial relationships, they would have ensured that I had them. Even if I took effort, the same effort so many white parents expend to send their children across town so they can attend a better, wider school. Wider is in parentheses. Pause for a moment and consider the profundity of this message. We are taught that we lose nothing of value through racial segregation. Consider the message we send to our children, as well as to children of color, when we describe white segregation as good. In summary, our socialization engenders a common set of racial patterns. These patterns are the foundation of white fragility. Preference for racial segregation and a lack of sense of loss about segregation. These are all in bullet points now. Next bullet point. Lack of understanding about what racism is. Next bullet point. Seeing ourselves as individuals exempt from the forces of racial socialization. Next bullet point. Failure to understand that we bring our group's history with us. That history matters. Next bullet point. Assuming everyone is having or can have our experience. Next bullet point. Lack of racial humility and unwillingness to learn. Next bullet point. Dismissing what we don't understand. Next bullet point. Lack of authentic interest in the perspectives of people of color. Next bullet point. Wanting to jump over the hard personal work and get to, quote, solutions. I've definitely been there. Next bullet point. Confusing disagreement with not understanding. Next bullet point. Need to maintain white solidarity to save face, to look good. Next bullet point. Guilt that paralyzes or allows inaction. Next bullet point. Defensiveness about any suggestion that we are connected to racism. Final bullet point. A focus on intentions over impact. My psychosocial development was inculcated in a white supremacist culture in which I am the superior, these are so many words. Let's see what it says. My psychosocial development was inculcated in a white supremacist culture in which I am in the superior group. Telling me to treat everyone the same is not enough to override this socialization, nor is it humanly possible. I was raised in a society that taught me that there was no loss in the absence of people of color, that their absence was a good and desirable thing to be sought and maintained, while simultaneously denying that fact. This attitude has shaped every aspect of my self-identity, my interest and investments, what I care about or don't care about, what I see or don't see, what I am drawn to and what I am repelled by, what I can take for granted, where I can go, how others respond to me, and what I can ignore. Most of us would not choose to be socialized into racism and white supremacy. Unfortunately, we didn't have that choice. While there is variation in how these messages are conveyed and how much we internalize them, nothing could have exempted us from these messages completely. Now, it is our responsibility to grapple with how this socialization manifests itself in our daily lives and how it shapes our responses when it is challenged. And that's the end of chapter 4. Be careful with that and enjoy. Please and thank you, and I will see you for the next installment. Have a great day.